see clothes as like even though it's ridiculously superficial, I think I see clothes as like a metaphor for life, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
As in, as a kid, the only thing I really had access to was, potentially a wardrobe. I didn't imagine ever being able to buy a house or own a car or anything like that. So what I wore and the relationship between what we wore as kids in school and stuff was like really, really primary. So it became like a really important means of communication, if you know what I mean. And what I often found was that actually people didn't really understand what I was trying to communicate. Even though I liked it indoors, it seemed to miss the point to everybody else. And but quite often I was, I still came home thinking, actually this works. I love these sneakers or these shoes or whatever it is. Whether, even if nobody else does. So it's almost like I developed this idea that actually it is fun, and if people engage with it because it's ridiculous, then maybe that's how it should be. Maybe there is a level of liberation in actually being completely wrong sometimes. I mean, you probably know better than I would when painting became hip again. One day it was, last century, and then the next day it was everyone wants to be a painter. How did you feel about that, being a painter before, during and after all this?
I suppose that painting has always been there, and it, the kind of fashions and the fads for ideas come and go, and people go, oh, it's out again now, or it's dead. The painting is dead argument's hilarious. It comes on and it's
dead. It was just back.
No, it's just back, but it's dead again. And it's kind of like that. It's like this, is it dead? Is this the final throes of painting? But it's, I think it will always be there, really, and it's a kind of thing about language, and it will always be something that's important, and that there will always be people that find a way to reinvent it or do something interesting with it and find a new way of responding to what's gone before. I mean, the history of painting hangs quite heavily on a lot of painters' shoulders, and like a lead weight, really. And I kind of, in a sense, just think that stuff's there just to be looked at, enjoyed and used.
I think within fashion there's the quick now, which is there's a certain thing that's, like, say orange is in at the moment, that's a quick now. But then there's the long now, where actually things like craft and quality and authenticity are re-emerging, and they'll be around for a while. Whereas, say 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, it was about a certain level of irony and appropriation, and it didn't really matter if it fitted, as long as there was a strange cartoon on your chest, and it had diamante on it. The quality of the product didn't matter, but the statement and the level of irony was what you valued. And now it's so not about that. It's actually about what ingredients go into making it, where is it made, who made it, and how long will it last. There are people who use very modern materials and modern technology in order to make something that does really reference the past in terms of its simplicity or its purity, and that I think is really exciting. That's the thing that I personally like to embrace, in the sense that it's actually quite an optimistic way of seeing the present, pulling from the past, but actually saying there are all these innovations that really make sense, and we can use them without actually abandoning the foundations that that we kind of find valuable.
I mean, I became very interested in the ideas of time, and this idea of modernism's kind of nostalgia for the future. So this kind of projection from then into our time now, this kind of idea of this is how we would be living.
I was wondering, do you imagine that when you see these buildings, they're like failed buildings? Or do you imagine that, because they're projections into the future, we've actually failed them?
I think it's both things. Some of those buildings failed, and I think there's something very poignant about that, because they had very high ideals, And then, in some respects, we failed some of those buildings by not either looking after them or not really just being, those people were kind of way ahead in some ways. And, maybe some of that stuff, especially the architecture, I think, is being revitalised now. People are able to build with concrete in that way. Zaha Hadid or something would be somebody that has really picked up the baton in many ways. But I think it's both.
That notion of failure, in a sense, I guess a lot of people would say that, say, for example, Sun Ra failed because it wasn't necessarily a hugely successful band. They didn't tour the world and have huge hits, etc., etc.
But I mean, when you think about him, I mean, he was the first really punk music record producer. He invented independent music because nobody would put his music out. He set up a label, Saturn, and the band sat there and coloured in record covers. And I just love that, the whole thing about that they became their own. They produced their music and they sold it at gigs. You know, those things are hugely valuable as cultural artifacts now. You see them with like hand coloured in covers, they're amazing. But I think that he was very much a pioneer in that sense in terms of taking the production of his music into his own hands.
Yeah. And what got me was that he knew about big band, he knew about orchestration, but also he'd bring in musicians who were kind of waifs and strays and non-musicians, and then somehow they become these amazing performers.
Yeah.
You know, playing in a way that made sense to, you know, the orchestra.
Yeah.
And that to me is kind of punk as well, where you can actually be a non-musician and somehow become part of a band that was really successful and respected, not because of your musical skill, but because of some other element that makes it make sense.